I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when I was 9 years old. I wasn't expected to live past 12 years. I can feel myself getting weaker and weaker no matter how many pills I take. And every day that I get weaker, a new pill is added to my collection. And it's just pill after pill after pill, and I'm sick of it. I know that I'm going to die, everyone does. But pain is unbearable and I can't take it anymore. Here I am, 15 years old, heart still beating, but to be honest, it wasn't worth it. Getting mom and dad on board for euthanasia was easy. The only problem is that euthanasia isn't legal in Maine. Lucky for me, my mom's a lawyer, and she'll be speaking on my behalf in court.
Miss O'Brien, from this video, it has come to my attention that due to Megan's current state, she will not be able to join us in court today. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. Today I will be representing the defendant both as her mother and as her defendant due to the claim that it is not legal for euthanasia in Maine.
And who will be representing the other side of the argument?
I will, Your Honor.
And what might your name be?
Eugene Miller, Your Honor.
All rise. Department of the Superior Court is now in session. Judge Judy presiding. Please be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Calling the case of the people of the state of Maine versus Megan O'Brien. Are both sides ready?
For the people, Your Honor.
Ready for the defense, Your Honor.
In that case, will the defense please approach to the stand?
Your Honor, as Megan said before, we are aware that euthanasia is still a very controversial topic right now, and for good reason too. This is probably due to the fact that euthanasia is a practice of ending a person's life either by taking a patient off a life support, which is a passive euthanasia, or the act of physically providing a patient with a fatal substance, which is active euthanasia.
We will hear the arguments from the state prosecutor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. The fact that a doctor is helping an ill patient end his life suggests assisted suicide. This can be perceived as a crime because assisted suicide involves a person who deliberately aids another person to commit suicide, hence ending their life similarly the process of euthanasia.
Both sides are free to present their arguments without my interference. Proceed.
Passive and active euthanasia are also referred to as omission and commission. Omission is the process of ending treatments that are keeping a patient alive, while commission is the process of deliberately providing a patient with a deadly substance to end his or her life. A study done by Professor of Ethics, Dan McGuire, explains how commission especially has severe impacts on society because it deliberately ends the life of a patient instantly. This relates to the fact that commission leaves a person providing the fatal substance with control over the situation, which could result in unnecessary deaths due to ulterior motives.
This is understandable. However, that was only covering the effects of active euthanasia. Unlike commission, omission still leaves room for the patient to be put back on life support if he or she chooses to do so, because it takes longer for the effects to take place.
This is a fair point. But have you ever thought to consider the various ways of performing euthanasia? Some are quite inhumane, such as placing a patient in a large plastic bag and filling the bag with helium, nitrogen, and carbon monoxide gas, and letting the patient suffocate to death until their heart stops.
Agreed, but there are more humane ways to perform euthanasia, such as taking fatal pills, injecting a fatal drug into a patient's IV, or taking them off their medication.
And how do you suggest taking a patient off his or her medication will improve the morality of euthanizing them? Because as far as we know, the medication is the only thing that's keeping the patient alive and from suffering from extreme pain.
A valid point, Mr. Miller, but allowing the patient to die slowly without the aid of deadly substances allows for a more peaceful passing. A study performed by the International Anti-Euthanasia Task Force suggests that active euthanasia often results in the patient having, and I quote, muscle spasms and violent convulsions. This often means that the death can often be traumatic to the patient's families if they wish to watch, and it could negatively impact the family's last image of their loved one if it was one of them having a seizure. No further comments.
In that case, let us move on to any other vindication.
Yes, Your Honor, I just wanted to stress that some of the benefits of allowing terminally ill patients the right to any form of euthanasia is that the patient gets to decide what happens in their future. This often makes the patient feel more likely to request euthanasia because they are in control of what happens to them and they know when and where it will happen. Aforementioned, euthanasia can leave a patient reassured knowing when they will die rather than waiting anxiously for death to come. In addition, it saves medical resources that can be used on a patient that has the potential to improve their health state because the equipment is not being, dare I say, wasted on patients to which death is inevitable.
A fair point, Ms. O'Brien. What do you have to say concerning how the system might work, considering it's not a very popular practice in the Western world?
It is true that euthanasia is not a very popular practice anywhere in the world for that matter. Nonetheless, Oregon is one of the 8 states in the United States of America where euthanasia is allowed. One case study in the United States focuses on Oregon, which began the Death with Dignity Act in 1994. It permits physicians to prescribe fatal drugs to terminally ill patients. Oregon was in fact the first state to decriminalize assisted suicide. As expressed by Connecticut attorney Andrew Walter, this act states that a doctor has to diagnose the patient for a terminal illness when they had less than 6 months to live. And if the patient asks, the doctor has no right to protest against the patient's decision and must prescribe the patient with a terminal drug. The patient's demand must be witnessed by at least 2 people. In addition, the patient gets a 15-day waiting period before they can request for the final time that they would like the prescription. This system has been thriving for 14 years because the act gives the patient multiple opportunities to be sure that they want to end their life. And if the doctor does not approve or does not feel comfortable assisting in the suicide, they do not have to participate because the patient can take the terminal drugs themselves.
Objection, Your Honor. Assumption that every state will comply with this act.
Sustained.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Ms. O'Brien, although the system seems very elaborate, how can we identify that the terminal patients have sound enough minds to make this significant decision of ending their life? It doesn't seem logical for a sick person to be making such life-changing decisions.
Dignity Act ensures that the patient has a sound mind by offering many opportunities for the patient to change his or her mind before finalizing the decision. Because of this, if ever, throughout the process of preparing for the euthanization, the patient decided to change their mind, the decision is not final and they still have the right to life.
An interesting argument. I'd just like to bring it to your attention that although this concept sounds fine in theory, how can one know if euthanasia will be exploited and used for alternative purposes in Maine, some of which could be harmful to society?
This is one of the major concerns of decriminalizing euthanasia. If it will be used for criminal activities, a case study done on the Netherlands, one of the first countries in the world to legalize euthanasia, tested this theory, also referred to as the slippery slope. The theory suggests that after a while, people will begin performing involuntary euthanasia and even compulsory involuntary euthanasia. This is unsettling because it could lead to, and I quote, the legal practice of eugenics or genocide. However, in the past years, there has been no evidence found of the Netherlands falling into the slippery slope. Actually, euthanasia is now successfully a part of the health system in the Netherlands, and children as young as 12 years old can be euthanized.
So far, it seems as if euthanasia is glorifying death. How do you think this will affect society?
Well, Your Honor, one of the reasons why euthanasia is such a controversial topic is due to religion. In many religions, such as Christianity, killing anyone or anything is considered a sin. And this goes back all the way to the forbidding of murder as stated in the 10 Commandments. This is why society often wonders about what happens to physicians who euthanize, even if it is legal to euthanize. There's always the question considering if the doctor assisting the patient should be prosecuted for murder. Due to the fact that killing the patient was discussed prior to the act, it could be considered as first-degree murder as it was premeditated. Nonetheless, any government should not have the right to give certain people the right to kill other groups of people. But this is not the point. Euthanasia is not about giving the dying patient the right to death. It is about changing the law to give the doctors the right to kill without being penalized for it. If euthanasia, along with assisted suicide, were legalized in Maine, there would be no issues with the physicians because it would be their responsibility to end their patient's life upon request. No further arguments.
No further arguments. The state rests.
The jury and I thank you for your time and would appreciate your patience while they discuss this case privately. Will the jury foreperson please stand? Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
The jury will allow the legalization of euthanasia in the state of Maine.
Yes!
However, under specific circumstances. Will the jury foreperson please read out the conditions?
Of course, Your Honor. 1. It can only be performed if the patient's request is voluntary and he or she does not feel obliged to do so against their will. 2. It can only be performed for medical purposes, and the people eligible for any form of euthanasia must either be terminally ill or have physical and psychological disabilities. 3. It can only be performed by a doctor. 4. The doctor will have the direct family's consent to do so. Papers will need to be signed to legitimize the authorization. 5. The patient must be conscious. 6. The patient must be in critical conditions or enduring extreme suffering to be actively euthanized. Otherwise, other cases must be through passive euthanasia by default, unless if requested otherwise by the patient or their family. If a doctor fails to comply with this statement or misuses active euthanasia to murder people or for genocide, he or she will have life imprisonment. And 7. The patient must be at least 14 years old to request to be euthanized, but parents have the right to request euthanasia for their children if they are under the age limit and follow all of the criteria listed above.
The jury is thanked and excused. Court is adjourned.